Perfect. Okay, well, I'll get started then. So I'd like to first off say good morning to everyone who's joining us. I'd like to welcome you to this exciting webinar, which is a part of our Bio-Entrepreneurship series in collaboration with LA Bioscience Hub. So today our speaker, Taj Ahmad-Eldridge, will be discussing business plans and presentation, articulating your journey to commercialization. So our moderators today will be Yordanos Gebrtatsios, the Executive Director of LA Bioscience Hub, and Sadhna Rao, Outreach Lead at BCLA. So my name is Martin Egland. I'm a postdoc at the Lundquist Institute at Harbor UCLA in Torrance, and I'm also a BCLA associate. Many of you have probably already participated in our events, specifically in the webinars that we've been running during the pandemic. But for those of you who haven't been to one of our events, we'll start with a little bit of background about BCLA. So if I can just move it on. BCLA is a project of the 501c3 Community Partners. It's an organization run by graduate students, postdocs such as myself, and industry professionals. So currently BCLA is run by our 22-member team, which collaborates closely with our over 100 partners to make events such as today's possible. So together we carry out our 6 years of excellence in bringing together the Los Angeles biotech community, and we currently have over 6,000 subscribers to our monthly newsletter. I would also like to mention and thank our core sponsors, USC Bridge Institute and CNSI at UCLA, who support us throughout the year. So our mission is to inspire, educate, and connect emerging scientists and entrepreneurs to grow and diversify biotechnology in Los Angeles. And we host a variety of events throughout the year, including networking mixers, webinars, conferences, and career development workshops. So BCLA has had the pleasure to partner with multiple organizations in the past, and here you can see some of our many partners that we've had over the years. And if there are some of the viewers out there that are interested in becoming our partner to increase your brand visibility, showcase your products, build connections, or recruit talent, feel free to contact me or anyone from the team. So for this seminar series, we are partnering with LA Bioscience Hub, and to tell you a little bit more about that, I'll turn it over to Yordanos Gebrtatsios, the Executive Director of LA Bioscience Hub.
Thank you, Martin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. My name is Yordanos. I'm at the LA Bioscience Hub. We are a geographically focused nonprofit focused on LA's east side, and we work to cultivate a diverse workforce that's ready to enter into LA's growing bioscience sector. This is our 5th summer doing the entrepreneurship seminars as part of Biotech Leaders Academy. And Biotech Leaders Academy was really started to benefit students from LA's east side. The program has 2 components. Paid summer internships, 10 weeks at biotech companies for community college students, and then the second component, which is the entrepreneurship training. So we're really pleased to be able to partner with Biotech Connection LA to present this 6-part webinar series and to make them broadly available to a wide audience. Our purpose with this series is really to introduce the important concepts and components of entrepreneurship in the biotech field. That being said, we're really fortunate to have our guest speaker, Taj Ahmad-Eldridge, who is Senior Director of Investment at LA Cleantech Incubator, LACI, and he'll be speaking with us on business plan presentations. At LACI, Taj focuses on companies in energy, transportation, and the circular economy, and he has such an interesting path to how he came to his current work. Before I turn it over to Taj, I just want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in using the Q&A feature in your Zoom control panel. We're going to be taking questions throughout the presentation, so you don't have to save them until the end. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Taj.
Let me get off mute. I was going to ask the optimal question of 2020. Can you hear me? Thank you all for coming this morning, and I really appreciate the team inviting us out here to speak on a few things. I'll get right into the presentation, and we'll get started. So hold one second. All right, you should be able to see our deck that goes into it. So you know, when I got asked about this, one of the things I thought about is how would I approach this from a standpoint as an investor. I'm an investor. And you know, one of the things I was interested in is typically when we work with founders or entrepreneurs, what we want to see instead of a business plan is a pitch deck. And so you see the cross out there was kind of in jest, but the whole idea is that what I want to talk about is this is the first pathway when you're focusing on commercialization. and ideas around presenting that idea. And I think it all kind of falls into the idea of articulating your journey towards commercialization. And again, my name is Ahmad-Eldridge. I'm the Senior Director for Investment at the LA Cleantech Incubator, and we'll get started. So a few things on the agenda. We'll go through, again, welcoming and housekeeping, introductions on my behalf, commercialization in the eyes of an investor, how you should pitch on that end, pathways towards commercializing, presenting your technology, and this is important. I'll go through the ideas of a pitch deck and give you a sample of one. And then we'll do a case study with Dr. Yi Chow from a company called C-Trek that we know intimately. And then lastly, we'll take questions and answers. But remember and recall, if there are any questions, please feel free, and I'll go into that in a bit. So when we talk about welcome and housekeeping, for me, learning is about collaborative conversation. So if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt me during it. I like to have that type of talk and conversation while we're refreshing the data. So that means also ask questions anytime. And then lastly, one thing I tell to my founders and the people I've invested in is that great founders understand advice discernment. What that means is that as a founder, you're going to get so many people giving you ideas and so many things that you're going to have discernment to know what to act upon and what to do. And I think that's extremely important as you're building your commercialization piece. So before I start, a little about me. I turn my camera off because I'm very expressive, so you'll be able to concentrate on my voice and what's here. But that's a picture of me. That's how I looked pre-COVID. But it kind of gives you a bit of a background of me. I graduated from Texas A&M, ironically with a degree in poetry and literature. You'll see why that's important in the future. I went to Pepperdine University here in Malibu, majoring in business and economics, international business. I then attended Claremont Graduate University in a doctorate level for geopolitical economics. When I worked in the career, I started while I was actually in high school with Wells Fargo in the early 90s, and worked in consumer banking, business banking, and commercial banking. And then I went to UBS Investment Bank, focusing on asset management here in Beverly Hills, working with high-profile, ultra-high net worth investors, and really understanding their thought process on investing. And then lastly, during my graduate work, I was chief economist for a fund, which really started my pathway into investing. And so in that process, when I was getting my bonuses, instead of buying cars or watches or any other things like that, I started investing in startup companies and really exposing myself to that on a whim. That experience led me to be a co-founder, advisor, and equity partner in a number of different entities in the areas of wine, media, e-commerce, apparel, SaaS, which is software as a service, mobile, marketing, and wellness and health. And in that experience, I've had 2 exits, which means that those companies were acquired by a larger company for financial gain, and a number of failures, which I think for me, when I look at failures in business as opposed to education, failures equals lifelong learning. And you take those experiences from your failures and you pivot and you reiterate. And I think that's extremely important. Since that time, I've been a judge in a number of startup competitions, including the MIT Clean Energy Prize, UCLA Venture Competition, Claremont Graduate University, Chapman California Dreamin', Berkeley Big Ideas, Start Out, which is for the LGBTQ community, and Venture Summit, and a few more. And that experience has really got me really excited about talking to founders and seeing some of the things that create founder success. So a lot of the data that I'll be giving you comes from not only my own experience, but this experience as a judge and seeing other founders go through their processes. I'm a board member of a few organizations, some of which include Homeboy Industries Venture Fund. Homeboy Industries is a company here that focuses on creating jobs for former gang members in the city of Los Angeles, started by Father Greg Boyle. So I love the fact that they're creating this idea of technology, business, and ventures for those individuals. I'm also a board member and a co-founder of a fund called Fund Humanity that was started during the COVID arena. Fund Humanity focuses on former felons who finished their experience in prison. They paid their debt to society and they could not find a job, so they became entrepreneurs. But unfortunately, when the CARES Act was created, the CARES Act excluded these individuals from relief. So you had a lot of entrepreneurs who had team members and employees that could not get the CARES Act. So we started that to provide funding for those folks. And I'm happy to say our experience there and our advocacy created changes in the CARES Act, when now the CARES Act is funding those individuals. So we're pretty proud about that. And then lastly, I'm a board member for Umoja, which is an organization focusing on STEM community college students making the transition to four-year colleges. So currently, after that experiences as in the startup arena, I was the director for the University of California Riverside Excite Incubator, where I work with biotech companies, ag tech companies, agriculture technology companies, and other type of companies. And we also started the first venture fund in the Inland Empire called the Highlander Venture Fund to invest exclusively in those companies. It was a micro fund, $10 million fund that was dedicated to investing in technology spun at the university. So really, really proud of that commercialization piece. One of the things I enjoyed there was that we were ranked number 4 in the United States by Entrepreneur Magazine for women and minority entrepreneurs in the nation. So one thing, if you ever heard about Riverside or driven down to Riverside to go to Coachella, know that we really had a really great ecosystem there when I was there. About 2 years ago, after leaving the university, I was recruited and came to the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator, which some of us call LACI, L-A-C-I, which is down in the Arts District in downtown LA. We focus, as mentioned, on energy, transportation, electrification of transportation, and circular economy. And just as a FYI, what circular economy is taking one product, say ocean waste, plastic, and turning it into another product, say shoes. So that's an example of circular economy. And then lastly, I'm an advisor for an organization called VC Include that focuses on training the next generation of investors. So a little bit of background on me as we go through this process. So tech commercialization, what is it? I pulled this data from our friends at the University of California because I wanted you to concentrate on a few things. Technology commercialization for me is the process of really taking these technologies from the research lab to the marketplace. It's similar to publishing research finding where you think of the data, but it requires a capital commitment to do so for development and having the team. And there are a series of steps that you have to process prior to having that capital that we'll talk about today. So if you think about the tech commercialization roadmap, I think this is a really great indicator. If you can look on your screens, it talks about how it goes from research. And again, I'm kind of tailored this towards the bio-bed space, but also I want to tailor it to traditional other tech because I think there's a lot of complementary factors there. But if you look at research that's come from universities and everything else, you look at research, pre-disclosure, disclosure, assessment, protection, marketing, in some cases licensing, that's when you have in the relationship with the tech transfer, and then commercialization and revenue. So that process is the process of commercialization. One of the things I like, and I don't know if people are familiar with the I-Corps, but the I-Corps is from the National Science Foundation. And it's a really great program that a lot of universities have. There are certain nodes that are here, some in California, Southern California, but it provides experiential education for researchers to gain value. And really the idea is to take a researcher and turn that research into an entrepreneur. And that's for folks who are interested in starting a business, really learning industry requirements and challenges, and really kind of taking that piece from being an academic, like I was, into an entrepreneur. If you've never heard of it, or you're not familiar with it, it's very fast-paced and rigorous. We had it at the University of California, Riverside. The teams are pushed, challenged, and questioned. And the question is whether or not that idea is worth pursuing. A lot of times I see that when the failure of companies and entrepreneurs focus on creating ideas that are not what we would call a product market fit. You create a great product, but there's no market for it. So that's the idea there. One of the things I wanted to highlight that I think is really important in that process of product market fit is that teams are expected to complete at least 10 interviews a week which means that over the 10-week course, 10 teams will have about 100 potential customers and information from customers to understand if they're building a product that's truly for a market that needs it. One of the things I wanted to talk about, we talked about the technology piece of it, but technology is only one part. You need a super team, you need the Avengers, and you need a voice. On one side, what this is if you know Jeff Bezos, on one picture, you see when he first started. On the next picture, he looks like a superhero, right? That superhero transition is, for me, what I talk about in really kind of being a voice and an advocate and really kind of being a leader for your company. Same thing with me. By day, you see this very poised gentleman there, and by night, that's the entrepreneur on the other side that really has led a number of teams to really grow great. The whole idea with this idea is that some people focus solely on the technology and forget that it's about the team as well. People sometimes focus so much on the technology that they forget that you have to have a great team and therefore also a great leader to push it forward. And sometimes that leader needs to be a superhero, like Mr. Bezos over here on this other side of the picture. Remember I talked about my degree in literature and poetry. The reason why I always joke and say that's really, really interesting, because even though I ended up being an economist, it still benefited me, because at the end of the day, understanding poetry and literature is about understanding stories and storytelling. Stories connect us, whether it's about stories about religion, stories about family, stories about nationality, everything else. When you think about that, they're all wrapped up into stories. And think about all the products that you've come across, that you've bought, that you really thought about. The interaction sometimes comes from stories, and stories allow for people to recall, have engagement and interaction. So stories are huge parts of the sales process, the commercialization process. And I'll be honest, a lot of people think it's only for B2C, which is business to consumer sales, but it also impacts B2B and B2G, B2B, business to business sales. So you're selling to other businesses, and B2G, business to government sales. When one of the things we talk about at the Incubator is that even a financial statement is a financial story. It tells the story of the company, it tells the story of the health of the company. So when you think about it from that standpoint, stories are very important, and the person who's telling the story is very important as well. What I want to go through here is, as we focus on commercialization, and if you remember, I crossed out the idea of business plans and focused on pitch decks. And if you're unaware, a pitch deck is a PowerPoint presentation or a slide presentation that normally investors ask for when you have that initial conversation. So as you're focusing on really kind of commercializing your technology and trying to get in front of investors, this is an interesting part of that scenario, because this is a very short way to get in front of them and explain to them very quickly what you're building. I'm a firm believer in never reinventing the wheel, and never, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So this presentation is from a company that's called Y Combinator. They're an incubator like us. I like them. I had a company go through their program, and I think the way that they set up a deck is extremely simple, and this idea is very simple as well. And so if you think about this company that we're going to talk about here is making a deck, they're making a pitch deck, they're making a slide presentation. So think about it in that standpoint, and these are the things that should belong in a pitch competition, in a pitch deck. So the whole idea is keep it simple. On the first page, the name of the company, of course, and a little blurb about what that company does. So again, if we're thinking about it, the name of this company is the Seed Deck Template Incorporated. And what they do is they build a template that tells you how to build a seed deck. And again, just as the FYI, just in case folks don't know, in the investment world, the stages are the first bit of money you get from friends and family. We call that F&F rounds. The second are pre-seed in some stages. The second batch of money you get from seed stage companies or seed stage funds, which is early stage. The next round is Series A, Series B, and so forth. So we're concentrating on the early parts of that with a seed deck. But remember, a lot of times when you focus on friends and family or pre-seed, they would want this as well. The second page, when you focus in on this, is your problem page. You want to identify that problem. And this problem, what we're saying is that the reason why we're building this company to build decks is because founders build bad seed decks. So whatever solution that you have, this is the section where you talk about the problem and why you built that solution. Remember, I talk about product market fit. You have to identify there is a market for this and then see it as a problem. And then here, that's when you go through and kind of list the types of issues with that. And here we'll talk about, this wastes a huge amount of time. That's why, founders would want to buy this deck from this company. Bad seed decks or bad pitch decks or bad presentations mean they won't get in front of the investors and won't raise the money that they need. And again, no money means the companies are forced to survive on any revenue they can take. So the whole idea for this is that identify your problem, really have it clear, show that there's a market for what you're building. The third piece.
I have a quick interruption. So we have some questions, but I want to encourage the audience to please use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature. Please don't use the chat feature. We have a question from Emily. She's asking if you're willing to share this pitch deck template after the webinar.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I know there's other audience questions. I'm encouraging a couple of audience members who've entered questions in chat to please enter your questions in the Q&A feature. That's where we're taking and moderating questions. Thanks, Taj. I'll let you continue.
No problem. And remember, please feel free to interrupt at any time on any slide that we're on. If you have questions, and we can take it. I'm a very good judge of time, so I think we'll end on time as well. So when we talked about the solution on slide 2, now we're on slide 3, the problem on slide 2. On slide 3, we get into the solution. This is where you talk about your technology, your product, or your service. In this sense, think about it again from a company that's building pitch decks or presentations. What they're saying is they can build a template to solve this problem. And again, if you notice a pattern here, there are a series of 3s. Maybe some of our neuroscience students, our faculty can talk about the power of 3s that's been talked about, but you'll see a lot of that in a lot of pitch decks that you may see if you Google online, and when they're talking about the solution and where they're talking about what they're doing. And here, again, how we listed the problems that they're having, we're talking about the complementary solutions that this company is solving and why this company is important to solve it. The next piece of that on slide 4 that you typically get is called traction. Traction, in the past, I would see a lot of times founders just think traction means, money that you're making, revenue. At one point on the tech side, traction began to be users. When you start seeing, I would say like the MySpace, Facebook type of scenarios when it was about users, user generation. But now you're seeing a lot of different types of ideas on traction, which can also mean grants, pilots, and partnerships. So here, if we're looking at it from a standpoint of your company building a deck, their traction is focused on decks built per month. And it's showing percentages and numbers and values on either retention and growth. So for here, as you're building a deck, when you're talking about traction, number one, think about the data that you want to track. And then once you do that, think about how can you make that data important. If it's not revenue and it's users, talk about how that's important. If it's grant acquisitions, talk about how that's important. If it's patent acquisitions, talk about why that's important. So your traction should supplement and complement your solution. This is another thing, the more traction you can show, the different types of traction, the better. For this deck, and again, what they're talking about is that in addition to the first slide of how many people are using it, this slide is talking about the result of people using that deck. So they're talking about here, how many dollars are raised for using their product from those growth. So this is just a secondary traction form that you can use. So when you're thinking about your own product and services, think about many different types of traction forms you can use and monetize. And this is really, really important for companies that are pre-revenue, that have not made any sales. You have to be really creative about what you're figuring out as traction and what makes sense and what would excite that investor. whether that's a corporate investor, an angel investor, or such. I kind of call this slide trust but verify. This is the why slide. If you look at here, what this says is that this is the why this works. This is what I would call their secret sauce, their moat. What is around their castle of intellectual progress that shows why they're a good company. Here, what they're talking about, these are the 3 things that are beneficial to this company. And so when you think about it for yourself, think about what is your differentiating factor? What is your competitive advantage? These are the things that talk about what makes your company a valuable investment within your deck. Here's a really interesting slide that we get, and I've titled this what is important to invest. Should be why is important to invest as well. This is the kind of thing that shows the sense of urgency. It kind of talks about the idea that what this company has done, what they can do. Sometimes you might see information on the team slide. I think we'll get into that next. But it's a really great slide to kind of talk about some of the value adds that the company has. And in this case, this company is talking about the revenue and talk about already the investors that are around them and their ability, right? So on the 3rd slide, it talks about the free to produce new decks. So it's a really good idea to really kind of talk about the other benefits of investing in your technology or product. One of the things I want to talk about is even though I'm speaking to this in the standpoint of venture, there are so many different other forms of capital to raise your business. There's debt. There are grants that you can get. Some of the grants, like we mentioned, are from the National Science Foundation and others like SBIR and SCTR, if you're familiar with those. And there's venture. The thing about venture is that if you think about it, venture is rocket fuel. So if you're building a proverbial bus, you may not need rocket fuel. And rocket fuel is for scaling. So you have to remember, if a lot of times I'll see founders who may be building a type of small business or lifestyle business. That's a really great business, but it's not scalable, meaning that has explosive growth. And so that's the thing to really keep in mind before you start thinking about building pitch decks and thinking about commercializing within the venture space. Is your, what you're building, is it scalable? Is there future growth? So this is a slide that you can utilize in that conversation to talk about future growth, to talk about what's scalable, to talk about how you can have many different locations to do the product, or there's many different markets to expand upon. And so this is a really good product to talk about that, because investors are typically always looking for, can it scale, scalability, so that way they can get an X number of return on their investment in you as a founder. When I talked about team, this is one of the things I love to see, and I think a lot of people get it wrong. So seed, and remember we talked about the stages of investors, the pre-seed friends and family. Those are the people who just kind of believe in your idea. This is before you build an actual product. The seed investors typically focus on the team and really advancing that idea. A lot of times I'll see these slides and they'll have the names of people where they went to school at and probably where they worked with these logos. The thing for me is that that's not valuable. That's part of it, but the third piece is what they're missing is what's the relevance? What's the relevance for them listing a team member? Why is the team member's work at XYZ company relevant to this endeavor? What did they study? What did they do that's going to make their position here relevant for that? So a lot of times too, this shows that the investors not only buying the technology, but they're buying the people who are going to deploy the technology, who are going to commercialize the technology. So you really have to showcase the value of your team, the value of yourself as a founder, in addition to your technology. Extremely important, and I think one of the things that really get lost in the shuffle. This is a space where I see a lot of founders fail to really do as well, is to ask. A lot of times you go through this presentation, you talk about the team, you talk about your product, but they fail to say, this is what we need. And this is why we need it. I'll see a lot of times I'll meet with founders and I ask them, well, how much do you need? And there's no idea. They have no idea. I think this is extremely important to really kind of concentrate on this piece and talk about your ask and understand why. So if you see here, what this deck does is it talks about the amount and it's very specific. You don't see a range. It's a specific amount. They talk about what it's used for, engineering and marketing. You should talk about what their specifically is used for. It says, what's the result of their use case? What's going to happen after we use it? And here it talks about, again, it gives you an idea of if they have that money, this is what they're going to invest in, and once they invest in it, this will be the result. So this is very important to talk about the ask in those type of ways, the amount specific, what will be used, and how it will be used, and what will be some results of their use case. So that's kind of the idea if you're focusing on a deck and what's needed. So all those things are what is really needed. And if you notice, I would say that I would kind of consider an intro deck. That is what I would consider about 7 to 10 slides, maybe 11, 12 if you're lucky. Don't go over too much, because those are the slides you would send if a person meets with me and I say, send me your deck via email. That's what I would get and I would expect. Nothing too long, because I won't read it, and most investors won't. If you see on the other side, it says demo. If you've ever been to a demo day, a demonstration day, if you're in an incubator or you're at one of the schools, USC, BCLA have them as well. I've been a judge there. Those tend to be a little bit shorter, very quicker, 5 to 7 in most use cases, to really kind of hit some of those points that we talked about very quickly. The last piece of it.
Taj, I want to jump in and ask you a quick question. This is related to the previous slide, so I don't want to miss it. We have 2 questions, actually. One, what's considered too small and too large for funds needed?
That's, and I had to turn the question on that because I love that question. I think that's a question that really depends on a few things. There are some investors who have, thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. I think it depends on what's needed to get your company from point A to point B, and the investors that you're targeting. As an example, give you a perfect example, and we'll use real life examples. There's an organization close to here called Pasadena Angels. An angel group, the difference between an angel and a venture capitalist is an angel will invest their own money. A venture capitalist will invest money of other people. And so a lot of times the angel will probably write little smaller checks. Sometimes it can be as small as, who knows? I mean, I've seen angel investments of 5, 10, 15, 25,000, 50,000, and 100. So the idea here on the number really depends on your need as a company and the investors that you're identifying. I failed to put this in the deck, but I'll include this to the team. There are several sites you can find information about that on the venture capital side. There's a site called signal.nfx.com, and that's signal.nfx.com. That's a site where it has a lot of information about venture funds like us, and it shows the amounts that they typically invest, as well as who's there, also what they invest in. So that's one of the very important things too. Like, as I mentioned, I'm in Cleantech, so I don't do biomed. And so, a lot of times if I see an investor or I see a founders in biomed and they come to me for investment, I would question, did they do their research? Because you have to make sure that you're talking to the right investor about the right subject matter as well.
Right. There's another question that was from early on in the slide. So it's from Brian.
Mm-hmm.
What is the requirement to be defined as a researcher, he has that in quotes, for the program Taj mentioned? And perhaps this is the I-Corps program, but Brian, if you want to, clarify, but Taj, do you know which one he's talking about?
Are you, Brian? Brian, if you're talking about the NSF I-Corps program, when I was at the University of California, we hosted that program, and there are certain nodes. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a node at USC or a node in LA, the LA node. And you go through the program and apply to be part of that program, and then they select the entrepreneurs or the researchers to take them along that path. There's a few people in LA that I know that are part of the I-Corps here in LA, and Jordanos, what I can do in addition to sending the deck out and sending information about Signal, I'll list those contact individuals that I know personally that are part of the NSF program for LA.
Thank you, Taj.
That sounds great, Taj. I realize that we're paused now, so I want to do a couple more questions since we're at the halfway point. How do you determine the correct amount of photos and graphics to text? I think they mean the ratio or the composition of photos and graphics to text on the different types of decks.
Yeah, great question. I don't think there's a typical ratio. One thing I would say, what this deck failed to do, and I did it purposely, I think it was done purposely. You want to avoid just so much text. You want to have a mixture of a few things, a mixture of pictures that are relevant. A lot of times I'll see pictures and I'm like, why is that? That has no relevancy to your deck. But you want to have things that break up the landscape of it. You want to have charts and graphs. I'm an economist, so of course I'm looking for numbers. So you want to have a mixture of materials from pictures, graphs, decks, and numbers that again tell your story. The whole idea of this deck and the process I send to you, it's a story that goes from the beginning to end, and that's why it's in that sector. And you have to paint the picture with your material being the pictures, the charts, the graphs, and the stories. But as far as a particular ratio, I don't think there really is. But one of the things I always say that's really important is as you're building this, try it out, test it out on people that you know. The idea, the test I used to tell my faculty members at University of California, Riverside is that I don't care what you're building, but if your 80-year-old grandmother can't understand what you're building, then you need to go back in and rethink about how you're presenting the problem and the solution. So that's one of the things I always talk about as well. Make it plain.
Thank you, Taj.
Another question that we have, Taj, is from Richard. If our companies have alternative ownership structures like a workers' co-op, how and when should we discuss our business structure with investors?
Number one, I love workers' co-ops. What's funny, we have an advisor at Lacey that's been an advocate for that for such a time. I think in the very beginning, I think it's important to have those conversations. There are things called impact investors. We are an impact investor. And what impact investor means is that they look at different type of sectors. We look at environmental impact. Of course, we focus on the environment, economic impact, creating job opportunities in opportunity zones at places that are underrepresented, and then social impact, which also includes focus on underrepresented and women founders and members and board members, as well as companies that are B Corps, benefit corporations. So I think to that question, Richard, having those conversations early on would be beneficial because I think that is a really great indicator of the type of company that you're building and an investor should know. Remember, the investor is your partner more than anything else. Great questions. Any more, Jordanos?
Yes, two more. So in Cleantech, do you also have to have a background in food or ag tech?
Well, Cleantech as a word in investment is very broad. So if you recall, when I was at the University of California, we included ag tech because if you're ever been to Riverside, there's a lot of farms and everything out there. So that's very important. There are a lot of logistics things there. Apologies for the dogs. And everything else. So Cleantech is very expensive, but I think the interesting thing about it now is Cleantech is really expanding from what it used to be thought of to now. At Lacey specifically, we focus on a few specific sectors. And again, renewable energy, that's anything that has to do with solar, energy storage, energy distribution, electrification and transportation. We believe that electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure is important. And then lastly, circular economy, which I mentioned before as the piece of it as well.
Sadna, you're on mute.
Right. We also have another question, and I'll read this question directly. But we should talk about the spirit of it. If we're going to pitch the personal computer, PC, in 1979, how would you explain a computer to a grandmother? I think James is referring to your point about the pitch needing to be simple, so simple that you could explain it to your grandma. And in the case of futuristic, the seemingly futuristic technology, how do you boil that down?
Oh, absolutely. You ever read a book that's about the future? That is the way you explain it. The idea here is that you don't get into the weeds technically. What you do is you paint a picture. Even in 1979, even if people didn't have access to computers, you can paint this picture that they can see the probability of it. There's many different books. Again, that literature is coming out of me. There's been many different books that talks about that and that painted that picture. I think the idea, when I mentioned there, is about not making it so overly complicated that the investor says, no, thank you. And so the whole idea is to keep it simple enough where you can engage, but focus on it. The other piece about that is knowing who you are and pitching to. If you are building a biomed company, and let's just say you're building a company that focuses on, dialysis machines, and it's a company that's focused on dialysis. If you have an investor that's been a former nephrologist, you can go into really good detail and you can really kind of talk about that. But if you have an investor that invests in a broad array of medtech, you're going to have to simplify what you're talking about a bit to see where they're at. So that's the idea that you're focusing there. And that's one of the things I'm going to say that also is important, that you want to make sure you do a lot of pre-work before you have that conversation with investors. You don't just send it out and do everything else. The same research that we take as academics, you take the same way as the entrepreneur. And to be honest, that's why I think that academics make the best entrepreneurs. I used to say that a lot. I used to get beat down on it, but I have a theory, and our case study will go into that a bit as well.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll let you continue with your presentation. Thanks, Ted.
Okay. These are great questions. I love it. So as we're talking about case study, this is a case study. His name is Dr. Yi Chao. Yi Chao is the founder and CEO of C-Trek. Full disclosure, C-Trek is one of our companies at Lacey. We invested in C-Trek. I love C-Trek. But they're an ocean-focused renewable energy tech company based in Monrovia. So I'll describe their technology really quickly. If you've ever heard about these drones that are in the ocean that may come from companies and government contractors, these drones leave the ships, go into the ocean, and sometimes they don't have enough energy to come back to the ships. So what do? They fall into the ocean. So what happens? You have this ocean littered with all of these drones because there hasn't been a solution to have longer battery life for these drones to do research and everything else they're doing. So what Yi Chao did is he took the temperature differential of the ocean in the form of a buoy and made to where they was able to get renewable energy there from that temperature differential and the kinetic piece of that, and become charging stations for these drones. So no longer will you have these ocean littered with drones. Now you can have those drones go to these charging stations that he has in the ocean and come back to the ships or wherever they come. So you reduce a lot of the ocean waste, but you also provide a solution. He founded the company in 2012 to commercialize the technology that he developed at JPL with a license from Caltech. So Yi has his doctorate, definitely one of those individuals that I would call as a former academic that went towards this space. And he was really lucky to get ongoing research and development that resulted in contracts, additional patents, and potential for new harvesting products, which i.e. is the traction that we talked about. The idea that I love about him is he's the intersection of technology need and consumer use or business use, right? That product market fit that we talked about. One of the things I want to talk about, if you remember that picture of Jeff Bezos, are founder traits. I asked a couple of my colleagues, what are some founder traits for Dr. Chao that we all thought were really great? The first thing is that in addition to being a very smart person, that goes without saying, he built a smart team around him. He understood it doesn't take just him. He needs a team around him that can really do it. And even though he was an academic, a professor, he was a forever student, what I would call a lifelong learner. And the reason why that's important as an entrepreneur, he was always asking questions. He was always really taking that data, but also he was having action items for those questions. So those questions turn into action items. Extremely important. He also thought about partners like us at Lacey. He joined the Incubator because he knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed to have partners that help him kind of hone his idea, to bounce those questions off of, and everything else. So things like Lacey, things like the Biotech Hub, and the things like where Jordanos leads, those partners are very important for doing it. And I don't know if we have people in sports, but he also focused on the 6 Ps. And if you've never heard of it, that means prior preparation prevents poor performance. So he was always prepared for that. And then lastly, one of the things I think that was really interesting is that very transparent, very open and honest about himself, about his lacks and of his skills, about the lacks of the skills of his team if he was recruiting. And then also what I didn't put here is that he was very quick to make a decision. There's this thing that we talk about, I'm from Texas, and we joke and say analysis paralysis. He did not have that. He made decisions quickly and understood the value of those decisions. And again, if you remember early on, we talked about discernment. So not all of the advice that he's gotten from everyone that he just do, because he would never have things done. But he used discernment and he used quick decision making to do it. What did that translate into? Investors, including Lacey, Pasadena Angels, Breakout Labs, and various non-dilutive grants. Non-dilutive, just as an FYI, means dilution means your ownership in the company decreases. When we invest in companies, we take a bit of ownership. Sometimes with these grants like SBIR, you don't lose your ownership. So that's one important factor there. So that's the end of it. I wanted to kind of end on a positive note as an example with a company that we know personally that really kind of made the jump from research or academic to a really successful company. C-Track is en masse right now to raise their second round of fund called the A round or Series A, which means that they completed the milestones in their seed round with all the investors, including us, expected of him and his team. So that's an example of the transition that you would do. I put here information about the organization. I'm at Lacey, and that's at laci.org. I put my number there. Definitely open. I'm always open to contacts as well. If you email me, I failed to put my email, so I'll definitely include that. But if you email me, I have a calendar system that's a bot, and they'll create a calendar date so we can have a conversation if needed. I'm very active on social media. I post a lot of articles for entrepreneurship, about Cleantech, about learning, about diversity on Twitter. And I used to be on Instagram. Lacey is on Instagram. I got off. I got bored with pictures. I'm a literature major. I'm sorry. I love words more. So Twitter has been my thing, but definitely LinkedIn and Twitter are the best ways to reach me. So I appreciate the time. And as I promised, it's 9:48, so that gives us a few more minutes for any questions that anyone may have. But what I wanted to talk about and what we took everything through is this idea that the process of commercialization is understanding that first piece of that, which is the lab piece that we saw in the chart. And then the idea is that if you want to build a scalable business and you want to raise money, there's a process towards that of having a deck that focus on it. Now, does that mean that you don't need to have a business plan? No, still have a business plan, understand the processes. But when you're having those conversations with investors and those engagement with investors, what the typical investor would want to see would be that type of presentation that talks about the technology and the product very quickly. And I would say to end this is that COVID has created opportunities. A lot of times during the downturn, those are the best times to start businesses. And I think one other thing that is really interesting about COVID is that the potential investors that you're contacting, guess where they're at? Where I'm at home. So I'm not traveling, I'm not on the road, we're sitting there. And so you're having an opportunity to engage if you have those connections. And I think the venture capital arena is no longer a place where you have to know someone to have those conversations. A lot of the folks put their email addresses out on their website, on Twitter. You can engage there. One other thing that I would like to mention really quickly that I think is important, and I've seen other science-based companies raise money from it, ironically, is crowdfunding. And I don't know if this might be discussed later on, but crowdfunding is essentially an online way of raising money online. But the reason why I said it's important is because guess what's happening now? Everybody's raising money online. So, one of the things we talked about with our founders is that you can use the process of crowdfunding to test out how you would have those conversations with investors online now. So I'm hoping that you got a lot of the presentation. I will share the presentation with the team so they can in turn share it with you. In an email, I will also include again my contact information, signal.nfx.com, which is a great resource. I'll think about any other resources, and I'll also, of course, include information about the I-Corps program in LA.
Thank you so much, Thaj. There's one more question people are curious about. Lacey, you've talked about it a little bit. The question is, what are the types of internships at Lacey, and what are you looking for? What is the criteria?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So we have, if you go to the website there, if I believe, we take interns a lot. I have an intern now working with me from an organization called Pledge LA. Pledge LA is sponsored by the Annenberg Foundation to get more women and people of color into venture. So that's my current intern for the summer. But even outside of that, we just take interns that might apply. There's an application form. And within Lacey, in addition to my team that's on the investment team, we have many other teams that are there as well. We have a marketing team. So there could be intern opportunities within marketing, social media, communications. We have a research team, and that research team, if you think about it, they're like our Bloomberg, our mini Bloomberg. So they do a lot of the research to tell us the type of technologies that we should invest in, that we should recruit. And so that's a really great team that's really needed. And then there's a team called our programmatic team on the Unlocking Innovation. And what that team does is that they do all the curriculum. Think about them as a university within Lacey that does the learning that I sit under. And then we have lastly a team called Enhancing Communities. And Enhancing Communities is a really great team. And if you remember the technology company Bird and Line, the scooters, if you remember, they had a little trouble getting to some cities, and they even had people like throwing away their technology, right? The reason for that is because relationships matter. And venture relationships matter. This company did not have relationships with the communities before they deployed there. So that's one big thing that we do a lot is at Lacey is we have a team that really kind of has relationships with a lot of different cities. There are 88 cities within the county of LA. We're responsible for LA. And so we help them establish those relationships. So when they do deploy their technology, you have a really understanding between the community and the founder. And so I think that's extremely important. And a lot of times people think money is important, and it is, but what's important more so are relationships.
Sounds like Lacey has endowed from a wide variety of backgrounds. So I imagine you would encourage anyone listening that's interested to find out more and apply.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to remember, I'm a literature major. I used to read Kerouac and Keats and everything else. And my transition to technology was a line that was not straight, but I think those sometimes make the best type of people because you can have the ability to talk about many things and really identify with things and we talk a lot about diversity. When we mention diversity, we think about gender and race. But, one of the things I always talk about, there needs to be intellectual diversity. When I was an economist in the class, all my fellow economists were all financial people. And so when there were conversations outside of finance, they were lost because they didn't have it. But I was lucky to go to Claremont. Shout out to anybody who went to Claremont. What Claremont does is what's called transdisciplinary studies, where you study in different sections of the group. So you might be in the School of Business, but studying the School of Education for a semester, or the School of Music, or what have you. And what that makes is a well-rounded academic, the organic intellectual, as Antonio Gramsci talked about. And I think the organic intellectual also makes one of the best founders, because then you can really kind of talk about, and even more so, the best investors too.
And Taj, we have one more question, which I think will be a good way to end the seminar and touches on what you're speaking on right now. Any advice for young professionals eventually getting into venture capital or otherwise getting involved in funding for early stage ventures?
Okay, yeah, let me see if anybody's around. I'm gonna give you a secret. The book Venture Deals is a fantastic book. It's called Venture Deals by Brad Feld, F-E-L-D. Brad Feld is the founder of Techstars. Techstars is one of the most popular incubators all around in the world. When I started investing, I didn't know what I was doing. That's why I failed miserably, and I learned from failure. And I know we have 5 minutes, so I'll give you a really big story. I actually quit my job as a banker, a six-figure job, to be a founder, and the company failed, and I was married and I had kids. So that was not a good situation to be in. But I actually, with my advanced degrees, my graduate degrees, I actually worked at a warehouse at night while I was building a company, at Zoomies, no less. And the reason I did that is because I didn't want to go back into the banking industry, because my mind would be concentrated with that job as opposed to being able to concentrate with my company. And those are the sacrifices that a lot of times you don't hear from founders. Everyone hears the success stories and they hear the end result, but they never hear about the process to get there. And so for me, that process was spent with a quarter, about 3 months of doing that. And what I liked about that, though, was that I spent my life around people who are like me, from an academic, class standpoint. And in that scenario, I was in a different type of environment, but that taught me so much about people. And I think that's very important. The reason I mention that is that I think the best investors are great people and that understand people. And they have a huge inquisitive nature for learning. I think when I first got started, there were not a lot of programs out there, but you have things like Pledge LA to get you started into venture. You have things like the Coffin Foundation that are really good for if you want to be a funder that costs money, but it's a really, really good organization for it. You have a lot of firms that offer internships for it. And most importantly, you have a lot of things online that you can look. I think when you think about it early on, the idea was it was about the lack of information or the inability to research. Now there's so much information, you have to have discernment. So again, the book, I see it on the question, is Venture Deals by Brad Feld. And I think, Martin, I am under time, unless we have any other questions.
By almost a minute. Great timing, and thank you for a very insightful and really accessible talk today. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. So without that,
great.
And yes, thank you, Taj. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I just want to make a plug for our next seminar, which is Friday, July 17 at 9 a.m. And the topic is going to be licensing the technology. So with that, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thanks, Badge. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right.